Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Walcouch. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast. And today we have another guest. Her name is Divya Gupta. She's a functional nutritionist. And we brought her on. We're going to have a conversation about thyroid physiology, its connection to gallbladder function, gallbladder and gut function and thyroid function. So we're going to kind of get into that. We've had some conversations about biophysiology, but I think there's such an intimate tie between thyroid physiology, bile physiology, and gut health that I think it's worth having multiple conversations and maybe multiple opinions on the topic. So, Divya, welcome to the Thyroid Answers Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. And thank you for having me on the podcast. And I'm so honored to be here. So my journey has been, wow, today I'm sitting here talking to Dr. Eric. It's amazing.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. I think that's an even bigger honor. So let's first give the listeners an idea of who you are and why we should be listening to what you have to say today. How did you become a functional nutritionist? What's the story? Every practitioner seems to have a story. They didn't get here like they grew up and came out of the womb and wanted to be a functional nutrition person or a functional medicine person. So how did you get here?
Oh, I wish I knew what I wanted to do this when I grew up. But yes, I have a story and not my typical path. I'm an Indian immigrant. In my bio, as you said, I'm a functional nutritionist, but I'm a very stereotypical Indian immigrant. We're either lawyers, engineers, or doctors. So I took the very stereotypical path of studying engineering. So that's what I went to school for back home in India. I studied computer science engineering, and I came to the US to do my master's, like a lot of us do. And again, I studied information systems, and I was living the American dream. I came here, I started working in corporate America. I worked in a top four consulting firm for 8+ years. Then I moved to Silicon Valley, where I was part of various startups. So you can be like, Divya, what are you doing here? Like, it was a completely different world, 16+ years, white picket fence, everything that, the American dream promises. But my journey, as you said, a lot of practitioners have a story. I had my own story of my health challenges, and also watching the women in my family knew that something got to change and that the buck stops with me, or I need to change my story. And it started with my gallbladder removal when I was just 20 years old and back home in India. And I don't, seemingly healthy. Okay, I don't remember if maybe there were signs and symptoms, and we just don't know that to listen to our bodies or to know. But seemingly healthy 20-year-old, I was in my undergrad at that point. Severe gallbladder attacks. I've been through childbirth now, and I would still take childbirth over gallbladder attacks. They were that bad. I don't wish it on anyone. But long story short, it just progressed within a few months. It took us a while to even figure out what it was. And then the only option the endocrinologist gave us, oh, we can take it out. You don't need it, or you can live without it. At that point, get me out of my misery. And it was out, and life moves on. I recovered, I came to the US. But now in hindsight, when I look back, I was always dealing with digestive issues. Now I'm in the US, stress adds to it, the food system, everything changed. And a few years later, I get my Hashimoto's diagnosis. I was 24, 25 at that point. And knowing what I know now, there was probably signs or the connection when my gallbladder was not working, that there was something going on with my thyroid. I know that now. Obviously, I didn't know. This was more than 2 decades ago, so it was a long time ago. I was dealing with it, and it made sense. Okay, I get my Hashimoto's diagnosis, but I'm like, and I get like what a lot of people get, a prescription for Synthroid, a T4 medication, and off you go, and that's going to take care of everything. And I don't know, Dr. Eric, I don't know what it was. I'm like, this doesn't seem the whole story. I didn't know. I also got the Hashimoto. Like, I don't know exactly what Hashimoto's was at that point. What does autoimmunity mean? The impact of it. But what I saw was at the same time, my mom, who had also had a gallbladder removed, who also had a Hashimoto's diagnosis, get her second autoimmune disease diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. And she was probably in her late 40s, early 50s at that point. And it's terrible watching your parents suffer through that pain. It's just the whole, like all the steroids you have to be on. And I just knew I need to do something different. If not, I'm really following her footsteps. And that could be my story. And I'll probably get there sooner than she did. So maybe it was my analytical brain knowing that something needed to change. And I started really working on, okay, getting into what, and no, I didn't know to look for gut health or thyroid health. This was 16 years ago, 17 years ago now. What do I Google? Nobody was talking about it the way we have these amazing podcasts and resources now. But whatever I could put my hands on, started studying, like reading up, changing my diet. That's one thing I knew I could control was my diet. I was traveling a lot for work, so I was eating out all the time. Okay, let me experiment with taking gluten and dairy out. Oh, I was bloated all the time. Oh, that feels better now. It started very slowly of making some diet and lifestyle changes. And that just started my love affair with what else is out there, what else is more. And I really got into this world. I went back to school to study nutrition. And then I'm like, the gut health become more problem. What does gut health mean? Maybe there's some stool tests I can do to figure out the autoimmunity aspect, because the doctor, once you have an autoimmune condition, you always are going to have those antibodies. They can never go down, forget about it. And I just refused to take that. And I just kept getting into this world of, getting the right trainings and more for myself, and my family. But then along the way, I found the path, there are more people that need help and I can help in my story and change that. This is where I switch. I'm like the Silicon Valley. That's in a way I found my calling and I needed. So I quit my Silicon Valley job and I'm fully focused on my practice and helping others to live with vitality and knowing that you don't have to succumb to their diagnosis or what you have inherited through your family, or we can talk about the yes, every woman in my family has a hypothyroidism, but that does not mean that gene does not have to turn on, and epigenetics play a role.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
And the process I think we generally think that once it's on, right? Once you have hypothyroidism, you're stuck, right? And that's not necessarily the case. You may have genetic predispositions, but it doesn't mean you're doomed to have hypothyroidism. At least in my 30 years of working on people, I see people recover from thyroid physiology altogether. We just see more people their thyroid physiology being managed without a strategy for recovery. So why would somebody say that you can't recover? Because they don't have a recovery strategy. They only have a management strategy, right?
Yeah. That's a medication, and those medications don't do anything for your antibodies, right? They're just helping you replace the hormone, period.
Well, yeah, it's about hormone availability is one thing, and then its utilization is another thing. And we can get into a discussion on the antibodies, but we'll save that a little bit for later. But I wanted to ask you a question, like at the time that you had your gallbladder out, and then you get a diagnosis of thyroiditis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, right? Did anybody in who you were seeing in that time span connect? I'm sure not without having any background, you wouldn't have necessarily thought like these two conditions are associated. But did anybody in your medical team who was helping you say, hey, oh, wait a minute, you had your gallbladder out? That we may have had, these two things are probably connected. Did that ever happen?
Not at all. Like I was dismissed by doctor, but I was dealing with a lot of symptoms of hypothyroidism, the muscle pain, ache as a young 20-year-old. I had all the heating pads, the lotions, because I would just wake up in pain. And I did not know that it's a hypothyroidism symptom or that could be behind it. I just remember going to a specialist and they said, oh, you're too young. It's all in your head. Leave.
I didn't know it was age dependent. I didn't realize that hypothyroidism had to be at a certain age. That's interesting.
No, they're not even interested to talk to me hey, let's learn more about it. And honestly, Dr. Eric, I think I want to look at the glass half full or silver lining. I'm lucky I got diagnosed that early and did not suffer for another 5 years. And even my diagnosis came as it was a serendipitous accident, because when I just happened to go to an OBGYN just for a regular checkup when I was 24, 25, and she actually felt my thyroid. And I don't know how many doctors who actually physically touch and feel, nobody is doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, and she's like, oh, it seems inflamed. I didn't even go to her for a thyroid. I did not know I have to ask about the thyroid at that point. And she's the one who referred me to an endocrinologist who actually ran some blood, like the TSH, which was like extremely high on the antibodies. That's how I got diagnosed. I would not have, because I didn't know how to advocate or ask questions or
Yeah.
who do I go to. And I did have like a lot of digestive issues, like the going from constipation to diarrhea, like, the bloating, but we just take it as part of, oh, that happens. That's part of life. You just deal with it.
Yeah, I think we're educated, like at least here in the States, we're educated that these are all just things that happen to us, right? Everybody has these GI disorders and you just take a medication, right? Nobody is tying, you're not getting TV commercials that tie the poor nutrition and the American style of diet and lifestyle to the problems. We just say, oh, you've got X. We put a fancy jingle and a dance theme to it, and we call it, now we use a lot of initials. You have SKD, you have da da da, right? Instead of saying the full name, we just give it these fancy little definitions or abbreviations, and we make a jingle and provide a prescription, and voila, that's the answer. And I think that's part of the whole big corporate disease industry. But I think it really is important that we start to realize that even though it makes it easy to learn systems in a vacuum, right? Like with this reductionist idea of how physiology works, it makes it easy to learn, because if you had to learn about the pancreas more than just the pancreas and the general way it influences other things, and it would be like, I think it'd be like drinking from a fire hose, right? So we break it down. Here's the pancreas. This is all the pancreas does. It puts this stuff in there, but we don't talk about all the influences of everything on the pancreas and how the signaling molecules work. That would be too much to learn. So we keep it really simple, really reductionistic. But then when we get into practice, I think we forget that all of these systems, or we never knew to begin with, that all these systems are like intimately related, and that you can't have a gallbladder issue without it influencing gut physiology or thyroid physiology or blood glucose regulation. Like all of these systems interweave. And so somehow we have to take a big step back and say, all these systems are connected. If I have a tissue that's now becoming dysfunctional and diseased, what are the possible mechanisms? We just don't typically do that in traditional medicine. You would do exactly what happened to you, which is we'll just remove it, right? Let's just remove it, right? Let's get rid of it. Or if it's a thyroid gland and your immune system's destroying it, we'll just give you a thyroid hormone. Who cares, right? That was a gland. You won't need it anymore. Let's pull it out, get rid of it, whatever. But health is getting back to health or recovering health is much bigger process than just cutting out tissues and prescribing something.
The bigger process, and it's so worth it. It's so important because, and everyone is so, as you rightly, they want a quick fix. They want a magic pill. And my journey, it wasn't a quick fix. And I'm saying it took a long time to get to where I am, where I feel better, I have more energy than I did in my 20s, in my 40s. To feel it took a long time, and it was a work. And I'm still working on it. It's never done. I'm still working on it. And the gallbladder, the removal, it's like 600,000 or so. The last time I looked at the stats, is performed in the US, because it's a laparoscopic, it's outpatient, quick, we can take it out, move on. Easy peasy. It's money for the insurance, you're out of pain. But nobody wants to, as you said, make the connection, and nothing in our body works on its own. And nothing in our body just does one function. We are very multifaceted. Everything has multiple functions. So how can we have these different specialists and nobody talking to each other? It's so frustrating. You go to you have a thyroid issue, you probably have high cholesterol, you probably have digestive issues, you have other, high blood pressure, and you go to different specialists and manage them individually. But
and we don't
look at it.
And some people, we prescribe stuff, right, without indication of what that's going to do. I mean, blood pressure medication. You got a patient on beta blockers, and she's, wondering why what do I need to do to improve my T4 to T3 conversion? Do I need to take T3? But when I take T3, I don't feel good. I'm like, you need to deal with the reason why you need the beta blocker for your blood pressure. If you deal with the inflammatory processes causing the high blood pressure, then you won't be on the beta blocker. If you're not on the beta blocker, then you can convert T4 to T3. If you can convert T4 to T3, now you're going to feel and function better. But that beta blocker, which is managing a blood pressure, not addressing a cause, it's a management strategy. And if that's all she wants is a management strategy, that's it. But she can't find a management strategy to fix the effect of the blood pressure medication, right? So, she was frustrated as to why why can't I find the magic dose of T3 that works to improve it? Like when I take it, it creates chaos. And I'm like, because you're just manipulating a value. If you really want to address the root issue, we got to get to the inflammation. That's what's driving the process. If we fix that, then you don't need the blood pressure medication. Then the thyroid physiology works better. And if your thyroid physiology works better, your gallbladder and bile flow works better. And then your gut physiology won't be in a constant state of dysbiosis. And, it just, it goes on and on and on. So we're going to let's start with thyroid. And it's how can a thyroid, and I don't want to, we talk about the gland and we talk about thyroid physiology. I think we should talk more about how thyroid physiology plays a role in bile production and bile flow, and we'll say gallbladder function, and then we'll jump into the gut piece of it. So what are some of the mechanisms that thyroid hormone might influence bile production, bile flow?
Yeah, so I know you've covered this in a lot of various episodes. The people hopefully listening know, the main thyroid, the TSH, which is just a signal from your pituitary sending to your gland, produce the hormone T4 and T3, right? And before we even talk about the bile, which we think of bile, gallbladder is just a storage unit. It just stores the bile. Let's even put that to a side. Let's go a little upstream. Let's talk about the liver, because now your thyroid, the hormone that we produce, and the liver have such a symbiotic relationship with each other, and how one influences the other, like they both are influencing each other's function. So when we talk about the bile, what is bile made up of? Bile, one of the main constituent of bile is cholesterol, which was gotten such a, let's reduce the cholesterol in this current, it's too high cholesterol, let's get it lower and lower. And your cholesterol is produced in the liver, majority of it. Our body produces the cholesterol we need. It's not just through our diet plays a very, very small portion of it. And our thyroid hormone have a direct influence on our cholesterol metabolism and production in the liver. So that's one part of a bile. A bile is like, a witch's potion, right? A lot goes into it to make the right bile. And then we also have bile salts, bicarbonate, lecithin, water, and all the different things that is produced in the liver to produce the right portion in the right consistency that we need, that bile is produced. So if our thyroid is hypofunctioning or not functioning well, dysregulated, it could be hyper, whatever, it will have a direct influence on our liver's ability to produce the cholesterol that we need. And then that's going to impact how the bile, the portion is off. The magic potion. I'm reading Harry Potter with my son right now. So that polyjuice potion, we are in Chamber of Secrets, it's off. It's not right. So that is one way it can be influenced. And if our liver, which again performs like 500 different functions, right? I don't know, it does so much for us apart from just detoxing the blood that people think of it. Again, the cholesterol production, the vitamin D synthesis. And I know you have different thoughts. There is some T4 to T3 conversion or what, I know a lot of it happens in the tissue, but it plays a role in how our thyroid hormones are metabolized. It does so much for us. If that is, you're feeding it a lot of fat, your blood sugar is dysregulated, it's going to impact how well it's signaling the thyroid and how that symbiotic relationship is playing as well. So that is one way how we can see, the thyroid physiology, the hormone can really impact our liver function and the bile production, because in the end, the gallbladder is just a storage unit that sits right under your liver, a pear shaped, and it just stores it for us. So even with my gallbladder gone, it really didn't solve the problem for me of why did the stones form in the end. Why? Because again, we need the thyroid hormone, right? Again, to squeeze out the bile from the gallbladder. For the gallbladder, for the bile and the thyroid hormones again play such a crucial role in not in energy. Everyone knows we feel fatigued when we don't have enough thyroid hormone, but it also plays a role in cellular energy. So our cells use a lot of energy to do the various functions. To even squeeze out the bile from the gallbladder, we need a thyroid hormone. We need T4 to help relax that sphincter. We need T3 to squeeze it out so it can do it. And how it can back up. And now if it's low cholesterol or high cholesterol, the bile's off, it's really thick and sludgy, you can see how it's not the gallbladder problem, it's something that could have started in the thyroid or in the liver that led to stones. So we're just looking at the end result, take out the organ, then going upstream of what actually caused the bile.
So let me summarize some of that for the listeners. So the thyroid gland is, if you said, makes primarily T4. And that is the kind of the pro-hormone. It needs to be converted to T3. Some of that occurs at the liver. Some of that occurs at the kidneys. A lot of that T4 to T3 conversion occurs in peripheral tissues away from those tissues. GI tract, other tissues have an enzyme called deiodinase 2, and its primary role is the conversion of T4 to T3. At the liver, we at one point, and you may have learned this in school. I don't know where you were in that learning process, but at one point we thought most of the T3 was generated by the liver, and there was a small portion made by the gut, and the rest, maybe a little bit from the gland. But now we know that probably 5 micrograms from the liver, 5 micrograms from the kidney, maybe 5 plus or minus 5 to 10 micrograms from the thyroid tissue, depending on what's going on with somebody. And then the rest of the 30 to 40 micrograms that's generated every day comes from the peripheral tissues. The liver is crucial to making the cholesterol, and bile's, I think it's 90% water. So hydration and water is really important. But cholesterol is a huge part of it. Other things you might hear about, like choline, really important. And this is sometimes when you have a family of people who have gallbladder issues, maybe there's a predisposition to thyroid issues, but maybe they have some problems with PEMT, which is one of the genes that's really important for choline physiology. But for the liver to really function well, the liver needs to get T3 from the bloodstream into the liver to really function well. It makes a small percentage of a T3, but that T3 doesn't stay in the liver very long. It goes back out. Maybe it's in there half an hour. So the primary T3 for the liver is coming from the bloodstream. So when we talk about thyroid physiology, and Divya said this, but I just want to reinforce how important it is. Typically, people are talking about TSH and T4, free T4, but we're not talking about T3. A lot of physicians don't run T3 because that's not part of what they prescribe. And so they're prescribing T4 and they're monitoring TSH, but you could have a perfectly normal TSH and have reduced T4 to T3 conversion. And if there's reduced T4 to T3 conversion, that means there's reduced T3 to affect the cells. And that's what I call cellular or tissue hypothyroidism. But if there's less T3 in the blood, then Divya's right. Like that liver doesn't have enough T3 to probably run mitochondrial function and generate these things appropriately. There are channels on the liver that bring water in, that bring other molecules in that are T3 dependent. And then there's export things. So if we produce some bile in the liver, then we need to get it out of the liver and into the bile ducts. And they're called bile salt export proteins. These are also regulated by the amount of T3 in the system. So the amount of T3 in the bloodstream and therefore in the tissue is critical to the importance and significance of how the thyroid or how the liver is going to generate bile, how much gets into the bile ducts, how much gets into the gallbladder itself. And the other thing that's really important, and maybe I didn't give you enough time to talk about it, was that bile has to leave the gallbladder and get into the GI tract, right? And there's something called the sphincter of Oddi, which is what opens up to let the bile flow in. And it's controlled to some degree by the amount of T3 in the system, right?
We need that. That's what I was maybe getting at. We need that T3 so that it takes a lot of energy for your gallbladder to squeeze out into your duodenum, right, through in a small intestine, and only when we eat a meal, it has fat content in it. The body gets the signals. We need some bile to start helping digest a fatty food, and bile plays. That's one of the roles bile plays, and we know it does other things. And if we don't have enough of the T3, it's not going to squeeze out. And sometimes maybe everything is working up front fine. It got the bile and it's not squeezing out. And then the bile starts backing up into the gallbladder, into the bile ducts. It can get sludgy. And then that could lead to formation of stool. Or sometimes it's too thick, right? Because yes, it's water and it's too much cholesterol, not enough bile. It's too thick for it to squeeze out. And again, yes, we so need that T3. It's not just for us to get out of bed and do all the things that we need to from an energy, but also at the cellular level, how important T3 is.
Right. And that's why it's so important to look at both T4 and T3. And also the reason why I think it's sometimes we don't always just want to jump to, oh, my T3 is low, so I'll take T3, right? Because that can definitely could change cholesterol levels, right? If you take T3, there's more T3 in circulation. That's going to make it easier to unload some of the cholesterol into the tissues, into the adrenal tissues, and maybe even into the liver specifically. But it doesn't mean that the other pathways along bile flow and bile physiology are going to be restored by taking T3, because some of those tissues may require on their own ability to convert some of the T4 to T3. So we got to be careful there, because sometimes people hear this, oh, it's just T3, then why? That's exactly why we should only take T3. Well, it's not that simple, right?
But yeah, and T3 also has a very short lifespan. Even if you take it, it's not like floating in your system. You can correct me here.
Correct. You're very short. It's argued whether it's somewhere between the half-life is somewhere between 12 and 24 hours, and it's not.
I've heard it's even shorter. So I'm just curious. It's even shorter. For how long? T4 stays there longer, but T3 could be even 8 hours.
I've seen the half-life of T4 is 7 days, and the half-life of T3 is somewhere between 12 and 24 hours. Could it be shorter? It could. But I think the even more important piece of that story is the T3 that's made by deiodinase 1, like in the liver, the T3 that's D1 generated, it only stays in the tissue for 30 minutes, maybe. That's not long. So if you take T3, right, that T3 is going to move into the cells for sure, but it's only going to stay in there for 30 minutes, and then it's out, and it's going to go to another tissue and get used and get in and out, and then it's going to get metabolized, whether it's 12 hours, 24 hours, or shorter than that, right?
Right.
But the deiodinase 2 converted T4 to T3, so cells that have the ability to convert T4 to T3 via deiodinase 2, that T3 can stay in the tissue for, it's thought, close to 8 hours. So how much more effective is that T3 than what we are taking, right? Which is, I think, why when somebody starts on T3, a little bit feels good, but then they need more and more, because as they're taking more and more, they're suppressing T4. And as they're suppressing T4, they have less T4 to convert to T3 via deiodinase 2. So now I need even more. And it becomes a vicious cycle. Right? It would be like, okay, you want me to clean your house. It's going to take 8 hours, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to stay there and clean it. Versus, okay, you don't want to pay me to be there for 8 hours. So you're going to bring somebody in there every half hour. A new person's going to come in and clean every half hour. Who's going to do you think is going to do a more thorough job? Probably me, because I know exactly what I did. The person who comes in after half hour has to go, what did the other person do? Where did they start? Where did they finish? What do I need to do next? And it's not as efficient. So we need both pieces of that system, but definitely there's an impact there.
I wish we could. Oh, sorry.
No,
it's fascinating. I wish we could at some point test the deiodinase. Like, how much does one need? Where are we breaking? Like, where is, because it's so individualized. I'm curious about your thoughts there.
Well, I think Dr. Bianco's in his work, he's got a website, deiodinase.org. He's doing a lot of work with the deiodinases. There's tons of literature out there now, plenty of great papers, but we do have a pretty good idea of what tissues may have deiodinase 2. I think we're learning more and more which ones do. I think if we thought it was less than it is, it probably is. But there are some that can only get T3 from the bloodstream. And that's why there's this biologic priority to try and maintain a T3 or free T3 level at a certain level. But there are a lot of tissues that have this ability to bring in the T3 and then top off their metabolism above what's in the bloodstream because of their ability to bring T4 in and convert, right? And that allows different tissues to self-regulate from what's in the bloodstream, right? Because if it was only dependent on what was in the bloodstream, then it would be hard for the tissues to act independently of each other, right? And we don't always want all the tissues working at the same time, right? Because that could be a mess. So it is this, amazing. Like I every time I think about it, I'm amazed by how the intelligence that went into creating the human being and life itself. It's like it's hard to grasp, right?
It's like every time I learn more, I'm like, shit, there's more to break down and learn. And it's complex. We try to simplify it on these podcasts, and you do such an amazing job, even the complex concept, but there's so much more that goes into each and every function in the body.
And we're always learning new stuff, right? We think we've got it figured out. And then somebody's going to go, oh, we found a new molecule and here's what it does. Well, what about this? Yeah, that doesn't work like we thought it. Been helping people with that mechanism for a while and it worked. Yeah. But that's not really how it works.
And that's why a lot of conventional doctors are not comfortable prescribing T3 because of how it works and how you have to change it. They are not so easy. It's not easy to get a T3 prescription from them.
Yeah, I think the problem is there is a misconception to some degree that if they give T3, it's going to create hyperthyroid problems, signs and symptoms. I do think there are people who benefit from it. And I do think there are people who have a temporary improvement and then it actually creates a bigger problem because it's like, I've never done crack, but anybody who's a drug addict, like they get their first hit and they go, wow, that's good. But then we're working many times against the intelligence of the body. I think if the person just had global hypothyroidism and you gave them T4 and they felt awesome, then you probably fixed the problem, right? If you gave them 5 micrograms of T3 with their T4 medication and they felt awesome, great. But that's usually not what's not happening with my population. My population is I got it worked for a bit, and then it didn't work anymore. And then I needed more and I felt all right. And then it didn't work anymore. And so then I took more and then it worked for a bit and then it didn't work anymore. But then something else happened. I started getting hyperthyroid symptoms too. And my doctor said that can't be. Yeah, sure it can. And so I think there's a place for T3 therapy depending on what somebody's goals are and their objectives are and their unique physiology. But just like I think there's way too many people over-medicated with T4, I think there's way too many people that are being over-medicated with T3. And and I say this a lot, like, I don't care what somebody does. If they feel awesome, if they take crack and they say, listen, I feel awesome and everything works great, perfect. Like if you're happy, I'm happy, right? But if you're doing something and the strategy works temporarily, but then you need to add more, then we're missing the point. I think there's something missing that we're not doing. So I don't want to get too far off track here. I want to get back to you. I had a specific question I wanted to ask you. Now, as we're talking about things about thyroid physiology and its role in bile function, bile flow, we haven't even started talking about gut physiology yet. But at some point in your journey, did you realize, because I talk about glandular hypothyroidism, like the gland can't make enough, and I talk about cellular, which is where there's reduced T4 to T3 conversion impacting some cells and tissues, sometimes global, but usually it's individual systems that are compromised. Was there a point along your journey where you went, I probably had some level of cellular or tissue hypothyroidism affecting my bile flow and gallbladder long before the diagnosis of Hashimoto's and a glandular problem?
Oh, absolutely. For me, when you're talking about medications, T4 did work for me. I know it doesn't, but just T4 medication, when I got on, it did work for me. And a lot of my symptoms that I didn't know I was just dealing with it went away, like the muscle pain and aches, the energy did come back. But as I've been like learning, getting more into it, why did I lose my gallbladder? That's what my thyroid probably affected. It can affect different tissues. It doesn't have it, as you said, all at the same time. That's where it impacted me. Of perhaps my thyroid was just subclinical. It was struggling, but maybe it was a conversion. It was not getting into the cells that impacted my bile flow production or the squeezing out of the bile. It could have, because I don't have blood work from 20 years ago or what was going on to really see what was going on. But absolutely, the cellular hypothyroidism is probably still something work in progress, because I can take all the meds, but if it's not absorbed by the cells, what good is those meds doing?
Yeah, because you had GI symptoms before you had the gallbladder issues, right?
I don't remember now, Eric. It was like,
okay.
I honestly don't remember the GI symptoms. That's why I don't remember the symptom. Probably I did. I just don't
thought they were normal.
Thought they were normal. We don't talk about it. Like, from my cycles were regular. So those hormones were not impacted. And I was in grad school, right, in third year of engineering. So there was stress involved. And I lived in India. There were toxins that I was exposed to. Now that I know that could have, I did remember getting the right side of my shoulder, the aches. For me, that happened even prior to my gallbladder attacks, because I was dealing with that. Though that's something I still remember. I don't remember any of the other GI symptoms I might have experienced.
Yeah, I would imagine, many times we have GI-based issues long before we have disease, right? And sometimes we have GI dysfunction long before we have symptoms. But with under the stress, and I don't know, I'm just projecting and helping somebody else out who might listen to this, is that, hey, if you've got some level of, if he was under a lot of stress, right? Family expectations, right? School, all this stuff, right? All this diet, change of where you live, like there's a lot of stuff going on here. And once you start loading the body with stress, we start shifting our physiology. We start to become a little bit more sympathetic dominant. We tend to have more down regulation of our rest and digest systems, down regulation of sleep, upregulation of inflammatory mechanisms. And it's not, for most people, it's not an overnight thing. It's not like, oh my God, it's like a gradual, steady thing that most of us don't even realize that we're having some type of health issue. Hey, I'm gaining weight. Like, you don't realize you put on the first 5 pounds many times, right? And I would imagine that under the stress, you've got an imbalance of the bacteria in the gut starts to occur, right? Now you get some inflammatory mechanisms occurring. Now you start to have the reduced, potentially local T4 to T3 conversion. That starts to affect the liver signaling, the biliary signaling, the sphincter of Oddi signaling. And now this sets the stage for more bile flow dysfunction, exacerbates the dysbiosis stuff. Now with poor bile flow, and we'll get more into this, that starts the permeability issue. Now that triggers more immune activation. And that would be my guess then down the line. That's what that immune activation from the permeability issues triggered the thyroiditis that then 4 years later is still there. Just because somebody removed your gallbladder doesn't mean that you fixed a permeability issue. And without, well, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but we're going to talk about how bile, right, affects gut function, gut physiology, and gut motility. But it was probably the process, like the thyroid gland. We see the thyroid gland now, positive antibodies and elevated TSH. We go, okay, now you have a thyroid problem. No, you had a thyroid physiology problem for probably years. But it was
absolutely.
And then the other part of that was what happened to thyroid physiology, broken physiology, or more adaptive physiology. And we can argue or have a discussion about that. But I would lean towards, under those inflammatory mechanisms, there's a natural decreased conversion of T4 to T3. The physiology probably wasn't broken. That's what happens when there's inflammation. And it, unfortunately, it helps you in cell defense, but it's not helping you with normal digestion. But if you think about it, if you're being attacked by something or there's an infection, does your body want to spend a lot of time on digestion, or does it want to spend time on trying to find the threat and kill it?
The latter, right? That's how our human race survived through famine. Like, we don't have enough food, or we're chased by a tiger, but we still survived as a species. So those probably genes do turn on at that point. But no, you're right. I'm fascinated by my story sometimes as much. I wish I had more blood work to see what was going on. And yeah, absolutely, I had thyroid issues long before my gallstones. That was just something screaming, and my body was probably the symptom. Hey, something is off, but nobody really dug in or asked the questions or looked further. And it really didn't stop the problem. Like the root of the cause was not really resolved. So it did. Eventually, my TSH was high enough. My antibodies went 4,000s, where they're like, oh, we can put you in this category. Now you have Hashimoto's, which led to hypothyroidism. And now I know what to do with it. Here's your T4. And that's a lot of people around dealing with it.
Yeah. And that's where people they get the initial hit and they do better, right? Because they get some thyroid hormone. So now there's at least some T4 that I can bring into the tissue and convert to T3. But I'm not as effective as I would be if I didn't have this inflammatory process going on. So you get some benefit, and then there can be problems with more deactivation of thyroid hormone in that same environment. So I think there's a plateau for a lot of people and how good they can get. So we talked about how thyroid hormone helps with the production of bile. It helps with the movement of bile out of the liver into the gallbladder, how it has an influence on the movement of bile flow and the release of bile into the GI tract. But let's now talk about bile. What are the roles of bile in the GI tract itself? Where and why are those things important?
Yeah, so nothing in the body does just one function. That's how the complexity and the beauty of a human body is. So does bile. So the one role that everyone may know it, but it does help with digestion of breaking down the fatty food, so we can absorb the fat soluble vitamins from our food, A, D, E, and K. We need bile for that. That's why no matter how many supplements one takes, and if they have biliary, obstruction, don't have good bile flow, it'll be so hard to get those number up. Period. But number two is, as it first flows into the small intestine, and it acts also as an antimicrobial agent, right? It protects us. We don't, as we eat, we come in contact with different pathogens or the outside world in general. We don't fall sick every time we're out in the world. A bile also helps us to ensure that it's killing all the microbial that, taking care of it, protecting us in that regards as well. And bile is equally important, or another role is also it helps to conjugate with a lot of the excess hormones, the metabolites of hormones, so we can excrete it and get it out of our system. Like the estrogen or the toxins, a lot of the hormones which are made of fat as well. that needs to get conjugated. And I see that in my practice, the beta glucuronidase, when it's high, like something is, you don't have the right microbiome balance, dysbiosis, or the bile, it's deconjugating and the estrogen is getting back. So to help with your digestion of the fatty foods, breaking it down so the lipase, it's like the soap, right? It's a soap molecule, so it can break it down into simpler forms when the lipase can come in and help digest the fatty acids that we ingest, or fatty foods, and break it. But antimicrobial, and also to excrete out excess hormones. And then a lot of the bile is actually, again, I know that you get into a lot of the recycled back, because our body is very, very efficient. It doesn't always keep producing bile. We recycle back through a hepatic system, so it gets back into the liver, so it can function again.
Yeah. And I'll add one more key piece there to one of the things that really does, it's important, but bile acids play a huge role in maintaining the tight junctions in the GI tract. Most everybody today who's got chronic health issues has heard maybe this term leaky gut syndrome.
Leaky gut.
And your intestinal lining is like one cell layer thick. It's like if you just butted your two hands up together and your pinkies were touching, where the two pinkies touch and where your palms touch, we would call that like the tight junctions. And that holds it, keeps the integrity of it. But those tight junctions need, when bile acids are resorbed in the bowel as they're going down the GI tract, that helps the signaling, that helps maintain those tight junctions. So if you have reduced bile production, reduced bile flow, reduced bile absorption, that is going to have a significant impact on your ability to maintain tight junctions. And that it becomes really important, because as those tight junctions break down, now things can move across a barrier where they shouldn't have the free reign to cross. And that can start to result in increased activation of the immune system, trigger immune-driven conditions like Hashimoto's. And I think that's one of the key things that probably happens that drives thyroiditis, and the gut connection to thyroiditis is not that the immune system has lost control and that it's seeing our own tissue as foreign tissue for some reason, or the molecular mimicry model. I think what happens is, as there's more pathogens, materials crossing that intestinal barrier, we call those things PAMPs, pathogen-associated molecular peptides, maybe damaged tissue crossing that barrier because of inflammation and dysbiosis. Those PAMPs and DAMPs and PAMPs in circulation are signaling molecules. They're telling the immune system, hey, here's the tissue that's damaged. This is the thing that's doing it. And that activates the immune inflammatory system. And that's good. We need that to happen. But the thyroid cells themselves also have these receptors for these DAMPs and PAMPs. And when these DAMPs and PAMPs are in circulation, they're flushing throughout the body, especially if they're binding to the receptors on the thyroid gland. There's science that shows that when these things bind to these things called pathogen PPRs, I think, yeah, is what they're called, right? PPRs. Pathogen, anyway, the thyroid receptors. I'm losing it right now. I'm getting old. But when these PAMPs and DAMPs bind to these toll-like receptors that are on these cells, that activates the thyroiditis. It actually converts that thyroid cell into an immune-like cell that now starts spewing out inflammatory signaling molecules that then starts attracting the lymphocytes to come into the thyroid gland, right? So is it molecular mimicry? Is the immune system, are these antibodies actually creating the damage, or is it just the whole inflammatory cascade is triggering T lymphocytes to move in there? And that's where I make the distinction. Like, I don't think it makes that much of a difference whether somebody has antibodies or doesn't have antibodies, because I see a lot of people who have thyroiditis that don't have antibodies when I start. But then once we start balancing out their immune imbalance, their antibodies start to pop up, but their immune system is more balanced. And those antibodies are always, we call them predictive, because it doesn't mean they're eating the gland. It just means there's potentially gland damage, and their immune system is able to produce some antibodies potentially for more cleanup than for destruction. But let's talk about, so we talked about how the bile flow is antimicrobial, maintains the integrity of the GI tract. What's the influence that bile acids, how familiar are you with the influence of how bile then comes back and influences thyroid physiology.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the expert right there to go in. I know it plays a role and in the whole recycling process, um, but I also, while you were talking about the cell-time junction and how bile can play the role, but that's where the thyroid hormone comes into place as well. The thyroid hormone also plays a role with those tight junctions, and that's why we're seeing how the leaky gut is, so the intestinal permeability is getting, not just because of the bile acid and the thyroid hormone, and how our external environment is are making it susceptible, making it the perfect environment for those hormones now to dysfunction and leaky gut to happen. So that's again another place where your thyroid and bile are playing a role and are influencing each other and influencing the gut lining. But to your question, not too much on how now the bile acids going back and getting reabsorbed by the hepatic system and how it's influencing the thyroid.
Well, I want to touch on it because I think it's really important for where we're going to go from here.
Mm-hmm.
When the bile acids help activate that deiodinase 2 we talked about before. So there's a receptor, it's called TGR5 receptor, and bile acids can bind to that in the periphery. So as bile acids are in circulation, we get more spilling into the blood flow. That's spilling into the blood flow. Those bile acids can start increasing the conversion of T4 to T3. So bile acids actually appropriately produced and healthy bile acids can then create improved T4 to T3 conversion. So if we lose bile flow and bile function, we can also reduce T4 to T3 conversion. The opposite, kind of an opposite is true there too. If we have too much bile acids in circulation, that can start to trigger more hyperthyroid type symptoms. So this is where we're going to talk about maybe how do we identify potential bile and gallbladder problems, and then how can we address them? Sometimes people really like to just say, hey, if you got gallbladder problem, just take ox bile, right? Because that's bile. So just take it. Well, it's a management strategy, especially if you don't have a gallbladder anymore, right? But you can take it, but we have to I think we have to be aware that ox bile might increase conversion, right? And so it has the potential to create some hyperthyroid type symptoms in the periphery. Now, some people who have hypothyroidism will be like, well, who cares? I want it. But and I've had this happen to me personally with one of my clients who started using ox bile and started saying, hey, my hair is falling out. I'm losing weight. My hair's falling out. I'm like, all right. And that led me to say, okay, what the heck is going on here? And then I'm like, hey, you're probably creating a hyperthyroid state with all that ox bile that you're using. It may be helping the digestion, but you're probably getting too much bile acids and getting into the bloodstream, and you're not really addressing the real issue. And so those bile acids are probably creating more of the problem. As soon as she stopped the ox bile, her hair started coming back, and a lot of the issues she was having improved. So you got to be careful, right? Like, we don't want to just let me just take this. I think we want to do our best job to try and address the cause. So we know thyroid hormone influences bile flow. Bile influences thyroid signaling and conversion. Both thyroid hormone and bile influences the gut biome, right? Almost everybody, I would make the argument that almost everybody with SIBO who hasn't had success probably has some level of a bile flow issue.
Absolutely.
And then both the thyroid hormone and the bile influence motility of things through the tract, and they both influence the biome and what grows there. And then the biome influences the bile acids that are reabsorbed. So it's this very complicated web of function or dysfunction when this stuff goes on. So you can't really separate those things out. But let's talk about, like, for the listener now, like, what are some clues? Because just like you, it may have snuck up on you and you didn't realize you were developing a problem with fat malabsorption and bile flow and gallbladder issues. So what are some of the signs and symptoms that you tell people to look out for that might
Mhm.
give them some indication that they're having problems with bile physiology?
Yeah, no, great question. And, thank you because I always, when I do these interviews, I learn something new every time. Every time so that's why every time I'm like, oh my God, you think you know something, and then you're like, okay, there's more to learn how the role that bile plays. So in terms of looking for symptoms, right, I tell people if that we can suspect that could be bile flow issue or obstruction over there. The first, you know, not being able to, when I ask this question often, is not being able to digest or feel good after eating a fatty meal. They eat something greasy and they just feel like crap. And then there's bloating and there's stomach distension. So if that's is happening chronically and that's something they're noticing, that's some early sign that could be something to do with your bile flow. That because bile plays such a huge role in how we digest fatty foods. And then the other piece that I definitely notice a lot in my family, as I'm always looking at them, is a lot of burping, a lot of eating food, and you're constantly, it's burping is natural, but when you're constantly that you have the need to burp. Um, and definitely if you're feeling perhaps like, just bloated, you have a a fatty meal, and you're feeling bloated. Those could be early signs to look out for and really pay attention to your gallbladder, to your bile function. Then maybe more, I think, as it can move. Again, now I wish I don't remember. Your stool is now clay colored, and it doesn't have that rich brown color because bile is what contributes to the color of a stool. And if you're seeing it in your stool, that's probably maybe a few stages down that you probably have been experiencing some digestive issues prior to that. And the other is if they've done their blood work and their fat soluble vitamins are low, like, how many of us are low in vitamin D and we keep taking those vitamin D supplements everyone is on, but it's still low, like, 20, 30, it's just stuck there. It's not going up. A, D, E, and K, which are all a fat soluble vitamins. Apart from D, a lot of people don't check a lot of the others, but we could and see how we are doing with those could be a signal. And then, and again, from a physical perspective, like, as I was, having on the right hand side between the shoulders, if you're having pain there, because, if you get into the meridians and the Chinese medicine, it's all our bodies are connected to. For me, I was feeling that. I would lay down, not be able to get up because this was so tight and painful. So that could be a physical manifestation of something going on with the gallbladder. And then, it sits on the right hand side below the liver, feeling tender there. If you're feeling that from, some people are more physical, they feel those pains, some people don't. And then finally is getting those gallbladder attacks, which we know then can.
Yeah, you'll know when
that you would know. Trust me, you would know. You wouldn't. It's I don't wish it on my enemy. It's terrible.
Yeah, so let me add a couple more things to that I think might be important. If you're having skin issues, definitely skin issues, you might have some issues with liver and biliary function. So, kind of itchy skin, rashy skin, I would definitely be considering. Other things to consider is like when you have a bowel movement, most people don't want to really talk about their bowel movements, but if you have greasier stools, like when you go to the bathroom, if you have to wipe a bunch of times, or your stool is like slicking the side of leaving like cracks in the toilet, that may be a good indication that you have a bit more fat in the stool. I know some people, we used to say like if the stools float, but I don't think that that's generally thought of as an indicator. But definitely the lighter colored stools, greasier stools, have to wipe multiple times, looser stools many times. And especially like you said, like if, hey, I just ate something that's fatty, I've got a bunch of indigestion. And oh yeah, and by the way, I got to go to the bathroom really quick. Like I had a bunch of this fatty food and I've got loose stools really quickly. That's usually an indication that you've got some challenges there. So those are things to look out for. And the right upper back thing, I can't tell you as a as a chiropractor back in the day when I did a lot of chiropractic work, how many people would come in with the same right upper back pain and just think it was like a structural issue, and you could adjust it and then come back and they say, it's back again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the early days, we learned about it, but we didn't really think about it. We were just adjusting people. But now you look back and you go, yeah. And then once you start really paying attention to this and you're doing more functional medicine stuff, you're like, yeah, there's a connection between where the gallbladder sends signals to the brain and where the brain perceives it. We have this picture, upside down picture of the human body in our brain. It's called the homunculus. And so everything organic doesn't take up a lot of brain representation. Like our lips take up a lot of brain space, our fingertips, our toes, and a lot of our sensory stuff takes up a lot of brain space. But all the stuff like in the gut, we don't really have nociceptive pain sensors in these things. If we did, every time food moved through your GI tract, you'd be like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, right? So it's not unusual that you might not have any real significant abdominal pain, but you'll have pain in your back, which is where the brain is perceiving the signal. It's saying, okay, there's a pain signal coming in. Where do I represent that area as being? Oh, that's coming from this area. So that's why your right upper back hurts. Just like when I've never had a menstrual cycle, but when women have menstrual cycles, they have you got chronic back pain. Well, it's probably not your back, right? Yet it's the pelvis and the organs in that pelvic area. We're sending signals to brain, and brain says, what area do I recognize that's coming from? Oh, it's from this general area. And so if we perceive it as back pain. So those are all good things to indicate that you might have an issue or a problem. What are some of and we're not treating people here, right? But what are when you start to think about, okay, this is a person with a gallbladder based issue. What are some of the thoughts going through your head of things as wise?
The having gallbladder wise, I definitely want to look at their thyroid function first, and again from a functional lens, right? Optimal, because you could be subclinical. The standard ranges are so wide, they wait for TSH to get to 4.5 and T4. Okay, let's just make sure how well or slow is your thyroid. That could be influencing, as we said, on the cholesterol front. And then the next that I want to think about, why is, going upstream, is it the liver? Now, how much does we need to support the liver? That could be happening. Is it, again, an obstruction issue, or is it the bile flow issue in the ducts? What's going on? That needs to be sort of really investigated for each person, what could be going on. And, getting a good comprehensive blood panel to just look at the liver functions, let's look at GGT, just to get an idea of where could things be breaking down from a thyroid. We can get a lot of clues, not for certain, get a lot of clues from getting a good blood panel as well. So that's what makes me, why is your body not digesting? And I used to be, I grew up vegetarian as well. And I've noticed, again, in the Southeast Asian population, a lot of them who are vegetarians or more carb heavy, probably a lower fat diet. Diet plays a huge role, and could that be leading? Is your diet contributing to that as well? Not enough, the body is not used to really working through digesting more fat or animal protein into their diet. How is your diet playing a role as well? So a lot goes in, and again, digestion, right? How are we not having enough digestive enzymes? Is there, again, not diagnosing anyone, but there could be low stomach acid going on there. And the signaling, right? Because we need enough HCl also sends a signal to the gallbladder. It's like symbiotic there too. What is the HCl status of that person? So that could be something that's going on, that different areas to look into. Why is the biliary dysfunction going on? I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Well, I would add, I would add a couple of things. Like I would want to, this is where making sure the person's hydrated well, right? Not
Yeah.
overhydrated, but hydrated well. So if you're a person who doesn't like to drink much water, and you're not drinking much water, keep in mind that 90% of the bile is water. So that's really important, as Divya drinks her water, right? Um, the other thing I would be thinking about, you know, is this a person who's got a level of dysbiosis going on in the GI tract? Because the bacteria and the bacterial balance can affect the bile acids. Definitely, I would be looking at T4 to T3 conversion. How good is that? I would be considering, is cholesterol stacking up in the bloodstream? Because now I'm not getting in there. I'm not getting cholesterol out of the bloodstream and into the tissue, so I'm not making healthy bile. Again, look at the AST, ALT, GGT, along with bilirubin. And for listening, like an AST, ALT ratio should be less than 1. And if yours is under or over 1, that may be a really early indicator that there's some fatty liver and liver dysfunction going on. So that's something that, your doctor pretty much will run lipids. If they say, oh, your lipids are high, you likely have a thyroid issue and you're likely having some liver and gallbladder issues, maybe adrenal issues as well, but definitely there's some thyroid signaling issues going on. But bilirubin is this thing you can take a look at as well. The bilirubin, as Divya said, really helps with the coloring of your urine and your stool color. But if bilirubin is starting to build up in your bloodstream, that's a good indication that we've got some problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what are the numbers you look at? Like medically, they typically say, hey, it's over 1.1. So I've seen lab ranges at 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. But I would tell you that if your bilirubin levels are starting to ratchet up over like 0.8, you probably need to start having some concern or looking at, do I have these other symptoms that we talked about, right? And then another thing that might be really important is estrogen. We talked about that sphincter of Oddi, and estrogen is going to have a big impact on that sphincter of Oddi as well. So if you have high estrogen, and many of you, if you're a woman, you've got probably a pretty good feel for what maybe you've learned about estrogen dominance and what estrogen can do. Estrogen's awesome. But poorly regulated estrogen can be a really big problem. And it is thought to be one of the leading issues with sphincter of Oddi issues. And so that would be a thing that we'd be looking at. Multiple things. What's going on in the gut? What's going on with their thyroid physiology? Are they hydrated? Do they have sex hormone regulation issues, especially things like estrogen? Those would be like some big things to think about. As far as strategies, and again, we're not necessarily providing supplemental strategies, but for patients that have bile and gallbladder problems, let's start with, they still have their gallbladder. What are some of the things that you might recommend? And if you say, oh, I do recommend some supplementation and these things, that's fine. We just don't want to get into, okay, this is how much you should take, right? Because we have no idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely no. If they still have a gallbladder and the goal is to keep your gallbladder, right? There are some scenarios where, for the people listening, like, oh, it has to be taken out. It's really far gone that you cannot save it, and it could be life-threatening. Please talk to your doctor. But if you have the gallbladder, as you said, starting everyone with optimizing their gut health is key. And we know how important the microbiome plays. So really working on getting that, if they have a dysbiosis going on, if they have, candida, other toxins going on, really working on optimizing functioning, starting there. Number 2 is actually digestion plays a huge role. And, I wasn't going to the sex hormone part, the estrogen, but, all of endocrine system, they work as orchestra. So you can't really have an issue with your thyroid and your sex hormones work fine. Probably not. That we know that it does influence. That's a whole other podcast episode to get into how it influences and the role it plays. But again, and our hormones are made of fat. And then for that, we need a good digestion, or we need optimized gut health. So going, really optimizing the person's digestion and helping him or her there. So what does they need to digest fat? So, a lot of times I would see, even through the blood work, point to low stomach acid, hypochlorhydria, not being able to digest the protein that they're taking. They're not assimilating it as well. You can see in BUN or in creatinine values, you can sort of start getting those clues. So really helping the person, let's help you just optimize your digestion. Some simple, hydration. Yes, most of them I've seen sign they are dehydrated. I can totally see it with the RBC hemoglobin numbers. I'm like, it's simple, dehydrated with right electrolytes. Digestion, hydration, lifestyle. I do it too. Like, I don't chew enough, and I'm eating sometimes fast, but really getting into the parasympathetic system even when you're eating. So we're chewing our food so our body can digest, right? Get into, okay, I need to start digest, building that enzymes. And, there are times and a place where there could be support with the right digestive enzymes, whether it's even hydrochloric acid. Again, not for everyone, but that's somewhere I have for myself. Now, I don't have a gallbladder, so I do need support there. But even if you have that, people have compromised digestion. So giving the support so they can actually start digesting their food, start breaking down their food. So that has helped. And then providing, and even simple as, that's easy. I love this apple cider vinegar, right? Just having that before meals, just to get the digestive juices to, okay, I need to start producing digestive juices. And, really the liver, supporting the liver. How can I support the liver or to support the bile? Is the liver loves bitter foods. Liver loves, so, how can we add more bitter foods into a diet? Nutrition and lifestyle is huge for me. If we can really dial in to those space and use the supportive supplements, a supportive role as needed, that would be the first place I would go. So getting enough arugula, getting endives, cruciferous vegetables, beets, lemon, artichokes into the diet. And there's an Indian vegetable called bitter melon. Might have heard of, but it's really bitter. We love it in the family. So getting enough bitter foods into the diet, so we are supporting our liver. And there are so many herbs like milk thistle or dandelion, and you can nettle leaf, those are teas. So incorporating all of those so can really help support the gallbladder for digestion. And then, yes, there are certain supplements. If somebody, they have an ultrasound, they've had stones, some, I don't want to name the supplement, but some, not oxide, like beta TCP or so, can really help. Hey, when you do eat a meal, especially if it's a fatty meal, you need support there because your gallbladder is compromised at this point. So while we're working on it, so that has helped a few of my clients to help start digesting the food without, like, every time they eat a fatty meal, they are in pain that night. Yeah. They're dealing with the attack.
Yeah, I think, like, I'm not worried about us naming a brand like like Apex has Bilemin and Designs for Health has LVGB, and there's all kinds of companies that have stuff. But I think for the listener, we don't want you to just jump into supplementation strategy, although those things may be helpful. Digestive enzymes that have high lipase are going to help you initially help break down the fats. And then some of these other ingredients are going to help with bile flow, bile consistency, and production. So there's a lot of things that can be beneficial supplementally, but the things that are probably most important are the things that you started with, which is, hey, when you're going to eat, you're preparing to eat, you're sitting down, you're putting yourself in a more parasympathetic state. You are doing something that's maybe going to start to stimulate digestive juices. Maybe it's something like an apple cider vinegar or some type of bitter, or just being more relaxed, right? Then we're chewing our food regularly. And even though we just got done saying, water is important, if you're really thirsty during your meal, you're probably not chewing enough, is my usual view. Like, people who drink, they need a glass or two of water with their meal, they're probably not breaking that food down very well as a starting point because they're so thirsty.
And sorry to interrupt, but and I think a lot of people are getting majority of the hydration during meals, because every time my clients ask, like, hey, let's not drink water while we're eating. Like, get it before, wait at least 30 minutes. And then they're like, now, because I'm not drinking while I'm eating, I'm not getting enough water in they are like dehydrated because they're not getting enough water, because we are so accustomed, or the habits have been built to drink while we are eating, drink water while
Yeah.
we're eating. I don't know. It's noticed that.
They may have bad digestion to begin with. So now if they're not drinking when they're eating, they're bloated after their meal. They don't feel like drinking more, right? And it's also important for people to know, it's not like you can just drink plenty of water and you're going to be hydrated. It's not as simple as that. Most people drink a lot of water and all it does is squish around in their belly and they pee it out, but it's not really helping hydrate their cellular health. There's a lot of people who drink a lot of water and are just and are still have a level of tissue and cellular dehydration. Because honestly, like when you get most of the water, when you produce ATP, the byproduct of energy production, ATP production, is cellular water, right? So if you're not making much energy and you're tired and you're fatigued, you're probably have cellular dehydration along with it. And you can't just fix that with more water. That's not necessarily going to be the answer.
Yeah, you need the electrolytes to actually get through that cell membrane. And, having a glass or two of plain water, fine, but the rest of it getting some electrolytes in.
Yeah. And then the other things you said, I think are really important, which is you need to do other things in your lifestyle first that are going to be conducive to good cellular health, not just gallbladder function, but good reduce emotional stress, right? Manage that. Because if you're stressed emotionally, you're down regulating your parasympathetics. Good sleep habits and good sleep behaviors, right? Because if you don't sleep well, you can't heal, you can't repair. You definitely want to eat a whole food based diet, and you can subscribe to whatever food religion you want. That doesn't bother me, but it should be whole food based. Physical activity and exercise is probably one of the things that most people, especially if you're having chronic health issues, don't want to do. But if you want an easy way to improve gut function, to reduce glucose resistance, to improve detoxification pathways, move. Right. Yeah. You don't have to be in a CrossFit program, but walk every day, right? At post meal, before a meal, go for a walk. Go in the evening before you go to bed, go for an extended walk. Very inexpensive. You don't have to join a gym, do body weight based exercises, but do some type of physical activity so that you're moving your body, you're moving your lymph, you're moving things, you're going to be sweating, you're going to start detoxing and clear and helping the body move things through the system. And we know that at this point, it's extremely helpful for gut health and gut physiology. So do the cheap 3 things that you should be doing anyway to maintain a level of health. And you're probably going to have a higher level of health and function, especially when it comes to thyroid physiology and your gallbladder and gut physiology.
The lifestyle aspect, absolutely. And I would say also we're just reducing our toxin exposure as much as possible, because we know how toxins can then, in the inflammation and everything that it causes. People don't have to go on a detox, get everything out of the house and start living in a bubble. Rome wasn't built in a day, but this starts slow, whether it's your cleaning products, whether it's, your personal care, especially women, there's the $1 trillion market of beauty industry with all the products out there and all the crap that's in there. So how can we clean up those, or eating the whole food, but as much organic as possible, just reducing your toxic load and filter your water. That's maybe can have the biggest bang for your buck is don't drink tap water, please. It's loaded, or
at least check what's in your tap water, right? And filter appropriately. Okay. But it is interesting, the beauty industry, which is so focused on what we look like on the outside, is probably the industry on the top of the list for making us so most toxic and ugly on the inside, right?
Oh yeah. It has a lot of, it's become a lot of phthalates free and BPA free. People are getting more educated about that. But it is, from, looking spotless, having that shiny skin, everything that goes on the surface. And skin is the largest organ. Everything we put on it gets absorbed, to lotions, body lotions, to perfumes. Even before we have left the house in the morning, it's just 8 a.m., you left for work and you've already used all those products. and from shampoos, everything you put on your skin gets absorbed. And then your liver has to now deal with trying to
Yeah, liver has to deal with
metabolize
it.
it.
And if it already is struggling with inflammatory mechanisms, reduced T4 to T3 conversion, reduced metabolism in the liver, how are you getting rid of this stuff? You can't get rid of it. Where's it got to go? It's going into fat tissue because the body, with the stage one of liver detoxification, just so everybody understands this, the liver goes through like two primary stages. You bring toxins in, then we convert toxins into fat soluble molecules. That's step one. And the fat soluble molecules are really the more toxic form of those molecules. And then phase two is supposed to occur if everything's functioning well, where we convert it into a water soluble molecule. And now we can push it out with that water that goes into the bile. And now it can be part of the bile that gets excreted. But if you don't have good gallbladder function or you have compromise of that liver physiology, those fat soluble molecules are then going to get stored in adipose tissue. And it can be one of the things that drives some of the obesity issues and blood glucose issues. Because if you have to store more toxins in your tissue, more toxins, more crowding in your fat tissue, more crowding in your fat tissue means vitamin D needs to go to the fat tissue. Vitamin D gets converted to 125 vitamin D to be an anti-inflammatory and expand the size of the fat tissues, which means now I've got more room to store more fat. Now that vitamin D can actually lead to more obesity, but now you have more inflammatory molecules, more leptin being released. At some point, your brain becomes leptin resistant, and it just becomes this like vicious cycle. So it becomes really important.
And we haven't even touched. Sorry.
No. I want you to finish because I wanted to ask one more thing, because you're a person who's got no gallbladder. And so I have my opinion on this, that anybody who's has had their gallbladder removed is going to need some chronic, like lifetime ongoing support. But what's your take as a person who already gave up their gallbladder? What's your thought process on that? Do you think that people without a gallbladder are likely going to need some ongoing support, or do you think a lot of people without a gallbladder do just fine?
I think they would need some ongoing support, because now you don't have that storage mechanism is out. Is your body still producing bile? Yes, it is. But it's now constantly trickling it into the duodenum, your small intestine, right? Which can get quite irritating to that duodenum. So it is because we really never really solved the problem. We need bile. So there is support that is needed. And I'll tell you, Eric, I didn't know about it for a long time. So I was not given any support once my gallbladder was taken out at 20. So I had to figure it out and find the right people hey, I need some support. So yes, I do take bile salts right now, but I try not to overdo it or take it with every meal. I sort of, learned my body when I need it, or it's just trying to getting more connected with my body to what I need. So I don't take it with every meal, but I do, like, especially if I'm having a heavy animal protein meal, heavier fat meal, I will take and my bile salts with that meal. Definitely, a protein digestion, hydrochloric acid. So some digestive enzymes, again, not at every meal, and knowing what my meal, if I'm having a snack, it's fine. My breakfast is fine, but making sure I have the right digestive support to make sure I'm breaking down the meal. I definitely did a lot of work on my gut and working on and making sure I have a good, obviously the bile flow, as we've talked about in this episode, how it can impact the microbiome balance and the feedback loop. So making sure, working on my gut, and also a lot of toxins, right? Trying to ensure my liver is free and not dealing with it. So supporting my liver. So all the bitter foods that I mentioned, making sure I'm having those teas, supporting my liver. So those are things that I do on a daily basis. And again, how much of it, where I need, I've just come to understand my body's where. I know if I've overdone it, I'm running to the bathroom.
Yeah.
When my body is giving me feedback, if I'm getting looser stools, or I'm like, okay, I'm overdoing it, I need to back off some of the supplements.
Yeah, and so I think definitely if you've had your gallbladder removed, one of the key things is that gallbladder, the primary function of that gallbladder is really to store, but it's also to concentrate the bile. And so think about the bile almost like a soap, right? If you had a very diluted soap versus a very very concentrated soap, the concentrated soap is going to do a better job cleaning than the real watered down soap isn't going to clean as well, right? So if you lose the gallbladder, you lose that concentrating ability. And so you're probably not going to do as good a job on your own with killing the bacteria that can lead to this, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and IBS and stuff like that. It can lead to kind of chronic permeability issues, the fat malabsorption issues. So I think if you've had your gallbladder removed, there are some things you'll probably need some support throughout life. And it's probably going to be, as Divya said, probably with the higher fat, higher protein food. A lot of higher protein foods come with higher fat. So higher fat, higher protein foods, those meals you're probably going to need a little bit more support. Now, which support's the best for you, whether it's something like an ox bile or bile salts or TUDCA or some of these other things that are out there, or just general concentration formulas that have choline and have artichoke and have some of these other things in it. I think that's where I would suggest that you really find a functional medicine practitioner who can kind of advise you on this stuff and say, hey, this may be the best combination of things given your situation, everything, looking at the bigger picture of what's going on. And keep in mind that there are two people with no gallbladder may need two different combinations of things or formulas just because of their unique situation. So just because your friend had their gallbladder removed and they got this amazobile, right, product, doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to work for you. And the other thing I would say is that just the problem wasn't solved by the removal of your gallbladder. The diseased tissue was gone. But what created the tissue to become diseased in the first place is likely still there and probably needs to be addressed. So I think even if you've had your gallbladder removed, especially if you're still symptomatic, you need to probably find somebody who's functionally medicine oriented and somebody who has a pretty good understanding of bile function and bile physiology and it should be said. I think I want to say this the right way. So Divya, you correct me if this doesn't come out right, but in allopathic medicine, we have a tendency to be more organ specific, but in functional medicine in general, you should be good going to a functional medicine practitioner. Like, do I need to see a thyroid specific or a gut specific or a SIBO specific? And I don't know that that's necessarily what you want because that's not really functional medicine. I think there are people that are really skilled. I talk through the lens of thyroid physiology, but I'm not really trying to treat thyroid. I'm trying to fix the cause. I look at it as the big picture, and this is a window to talk to people about this. But in functional medicine, if you're going to somebody and they say, hey, I just specialize in X, if that doesn't match up, that may not be a great match for you, right? But if you see, like, well, you're talking about thyroid physiology, you probably don't know anything about bile. Well, I may be talking through that lens, but I can assure you, I understand all these other aspects, bile physiology, sex hormone physiology, adrenal physiology, blood sugar physiology, because that's what we need to be able to do as a functional medicine practitioner. So do you think that came out right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if somebody says they're a functional medicine practitioner, they need to understand that interconnection that we started with, that how this body works. If they don't, then they're still allopathic medicine. They're just calling themselves functional medicine now if they are doing that. So, and you're right, I talk to a lot of people through the lens of thyroid, but the adrenals are connected to your thyroid. We didn't even touch there because your cortisol plays a huge role. And for me, thyroid is just raising the alarm in the body. It's just like the yellow canary in the coal mine. It's not what the issue is. It's actually digging deeper into what the liver, the bile, the adrenals, the gut, and the thyroid, the poor little organ, is just sounding the alarm that something is not off. So yeah, you said it, you hit the nail on the head. You have to look at somebody who looks at everything in the body is interconnected, who understands it, and not just, I'm a SIBO specialist, or I just work on SIBO, but
right.
Why is the SIBO there? As you said in bile.
Right. But that's not to say that somebody who talks through the lens of SIBO, right, doesn't not know those things. So as a person who's looking for a functional medicine practitioner, be aware that many of us talk through a lens, but we're a jack of all trades when it comes to it, because that's what functional medicine is. And so that's part of that's going to be for you, as when you're asking questions like, get more information about what they do. If they say, listen, I'm a functional practitioner, an integrated practitioner, but I do bioidentical hormones and thyroid hormone replacement. No offense to anybody, but that's more allopathically oriented, because what they're trying to do is manage sex hormones or manage thyroid physiology.
Mm-hmm.
They may be somebody who does functional medicine, integrated medicine, and they use those things as part of their practice, but they're also trying to address the root cause issues at the same time. But I think that's the big thing, that the person who's struggling, they're coming to functional medicine, is do a little bit of homework. In allopathic medicine, you were looking for the specialist, right? Like that was the only thing. And I think you got to look at functional medicine a little differently. Like, is this person really know a lot about thyroid physiology? If you have a thyroid problem, you may want that, right? I want somebody who's really knowledgeable. But if they're really going to help you address root cause issues, they're not just focusing on your thyroid. They're focused on everything else. Because as Divya said, the thyroid is the warning sign that there's a problem. When we see it, thyroid physiology problems, we shouldn't be rushing in like, oh, just that's the problem, let's give it. We should be looking at that and saying, oh, something's going on in the body that the thyroid physiology is adapting this way. There's a problem here. Let's go find it. Right.
And so I'm sure you see it in your practice. And so since being a thyroid patient, like, it doesn't exist on its own. We'll either have a digestive issue, either your menstrual cycles are off. I see a lot of women with PCOS, period issue, and like hormones, or they have something else going on with their liver or gallbladder. So it doesn't exist on its own. I just have hypothyroidism, period.
Yeah, I would say it's extremely rare. And those people aren't the people that show up in our office, because they get the T4 and they're like, lights are on, everything's good, metabolism's good, weight's good, energy's good, and they're like, everything's good, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what shows up in our practices. We get the people that I tried this, I tried that, it didn't work. So anyway, Divya, I want to finish this up. We're kind of pushing past our hour and a half. See, this is how fast time goes, right? So it was a great conversation, but give people some idea of where they can find, if they want to learn more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to my website, divyagupta.net. And I also have a comprehensive guide there for like hypothyroidism symptoms, because the symptoms it's an exhaustive list. The way you experience hypothyroidism could be different from the person next to you. So a list of symptoms to start understanding, and also a lab guide of what are at least the 6 basic labs one should get for a full thyroid panel, not just your TSH, what should be optimal ranges. So people can start really just become CEO of your own body, start understanding your numbers, what's going on, so you can ask the right questions or go to the right person to help you. And also on Instagram, that's the social channel that I use, and I have a love-hate relationship. No, but I love it. I give it love. I'm sure it'll give me love back. So @_Div Gupta is where my Instagram handle is, where I tend to share a lot more tips, lifestyle, life without a gallbladder, what one can do, lifestyle, diet related. So that's where they can find me.
Awesome. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast. It was a great conversation. And for the listeners, make sure you share this podcast with friends and family, especially those who have thyroid or gallbladder or gut issue. I think we both agree this would be very helpful for them. And if you're not following the show or haven't subscribed to the show, please do that. And if you get a chance, give us a fantastic review. 5 stars, I think, is the best. And that's, I think, the one that Divya deserves for this podcast. She did a fantastic job. And if you have any questions regarding me, you can find me at rejuvigencenter.com. And if you have an interest in discussing your condition, what's going on with your health, you can schedule a complimentary discovery call there. And of course, as always, I have the book out that I wrote with my friend, Dr. Kelly Halderman, The Thyroid Debacle. Please go out, buy that, share it, and learn a little bit more about thyroid physiology. So Divya, thanks for coming on the Thyroid Answers podcast. It was great having you on. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Dr. Ed. Thank you so much for having me.